There you are, Jamey. Or maybe you're in New
Hello,
York City.
David.
Not sure.
No,
Yeah.
I'm in New Jersey, just south of Newark.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, the floor is open for you. And what we've been finding is it's most easy for people to self-introduce themselves. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, happy to do that. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jamey Verilli, and I am a teacher and principal of 26 years and a dean and professor of a dozen years. I teach teachers now and have the privilege to work with teachers. And tonight, what I want to do is I want to talk about teachers, both historically and currently, because to me, teachers are the most important people in this country. They're the soul of our nation, and I want to celebrate them this evening. So as I get ready to begin and share screen here, I want to ask anybody out there who's still with us at 1:30 in the morning Eastern time, if you would please put your name in the chat, the live chat, if you are a teacher. Just put your name in there with an exclamation point, because you are doing some of the most important work in our country, and you should be celebrated for doing it. If you are up with us and you are at Zion AME Church, and you're a teacher in that room, raise your hand, stand up, shout, do whatever you need to do to let people know that you are a teacher in the room, because you are so important. And tonight I want to celebrate teachers and talk about the power of teachers. So let me just get my presentation up. So it's showing. All right, everyone hopefully can see my slides there. And what I'd love to talk about would be the Selma Teachers March in 1965. I was also a privileged educator to go on the Common Power trip for Truth and Purpose. And there I talked to an amazing foot soldier named Charles Malden, who told me all about this Teachers March, and I want to share it with you. But before we do that, let's honor teachers even a little bit more. I can ask anybody who's awake and out there and with me right now to think of who was the most impactful teacher that you've known. Was it an elementary school teacher, a middle school, a high school, maybe a university level teacher that you had? Think about who that person was that had an impact on you. And if you're live and if you're in the church, I'm going to ask you to turn to somebody near you and tell them who that teacher was and why they were impactful. If you're out on Zoom land, I'm going to ask you just to throw that teacher's name in the chat. Maybe put a word or two next to it about why that teacher was impactful for you and how they made a difference in your life, because we should celebrate teachers for all that they do. So take a second now, and if you would, just throw that into the live chat, or talk to your neighbor if you're still up and you're in the church. Give you a second to do that. I'll explain the teacher in the picture here. This is a teacher, one of the first teachers I hired when I was a principal. I started a school called North Star Academy, and her name was Miss Julie Jackson, and she's one of the most extraordinary teachers I've ever seen. Right now, she's actually grown to the point where she is now the CEO of a whole network of 56 schools. But she was one of the greatest teachers I ever saw in her impact on kids, and so I want to celebrate her this evening. That's who I'd be writing in the chat right now, Miss Julie Jackson. And I hope others have been able to share some names too. I am not privy to see the live chat at this moment, but hopefully those names are showing up there for folks who are here. All right. All of my 26 years in teaching, I was a history social studies teacher. So that's where I want to take us next, is on a little history lesson. And I want to talk about Selma, Alabama in 1965. Dr. Terry's talked about it a bit. Several of our guests have talked about Selma. It's quite a focal point in change in this country. And I want to start there because that was a place where there was many glaring injustices. And one of them was that folks were not allowed to vote. If you were African American, you were denied the right to vote. There were about 50,000 African Americans in the area of Selma, but only 300 in 1965 were registered to vote. And Dr. Terry spoke earlier about disenfranchisement and all the ways that people were kept from voting, literacy tests, closing the registrar's office when people were so they couldn't come in, racist registrars who had the jurisdiction to decide if someone passed or not. All these things helped keep people from voting and restricted the right to vote for so many. And it was also at that time still very strong, the system of segregation. And one point I'd like to make is that segregation is not a system of separation, it's a system of domination. It is designed to keep people in a racial caste system and to hold them down and oppress them. And you can't do that to a race of people or any people without intimidation and violence. And those things were very real for the people of Selma. Both groups like the Ku Klux Klan and terrorist groups that created violence, but also in the police force. Pictured here is the sheriff of Selma. His name is Sheriff Jim Clark. And he too was part of this intimidation and violence to keep people from voting. In fact, Selma was such a tough place that a lot of civil rights organizations decided they couldn't even go there to do work. it would be too difficult to register voters. It would be too difficult to make a change. The phrase was, in Selma, the white folks are too mean and the black folks are too afraid. And so nobody went there until a young man named Bernard Lafayette, pictured here with Dr. King, decided that he was going to go, even though his organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, said that he shouldn't go, but he decided to go anyway. And he went there and he found what was said about Selma was true. It was a very tough place. And so some of the first people to catch on to his message, who he organized, were actually young people, students. They were the first to actually march and begin to protest. And on our Truth and Purpose Learning Tour, we were able to meet several of these incredible people who started out at 8 years old, 11 years old, 17 years old as freedom fighters for this country. As the movement got started, it took him 2 years to organize people and get things going there. And it was a slow growth. The city tried to stop it by forbidding any gatherings of groups of more than 2 people together. And so that made it really hard to organize. And now I want to turn to the teachers. The teachers in Selma were some of the most respected and educated professionals in the city, but they also faced a lot of injustice. In fact, they had an incredibly racist superintendent. The story is that as students were walking out of the high school and beginning to protest, the superintendent was furious. He went down to the high school and in front of kids, in front of teachers, this white superintendent slapped the African-American principal across the face publicly for allowing students to be involved in the civil rights movement. This was the kind of atmosphere and the way he ran schools. Teachers had a lot to lose. They had a good job. They even had pensions. So for them, thinking about joining the movement was a real challenge. But they knew that even they, as some of the most educated people in the community with master's degrees, couldn't vote themselves. And they saw that injustice. And they saw their children walking out of the school to go march and protest. And as kids would leave the school, they would say things to them like, "Goodbye, we're going to get your freedom." And this began to tug at the teachers. Here are our young people, here are our children fighting for us, yet we're not going out. So they decided to get together and discuss what to do. And so their leader was a man named Reverend Frederick Reese. He was the head of the Teachers Association in Selma. And he called the meeting to discuss, should we go out? Should we march for our voting rights? Should we protest? And they had long discussions. They looked at the risks. And finally, 104 of the teachers decided, yes, indeed, we are going to do this. We're going to walk down to the Dallas County Courthouse. We're going to face Jim Clark, and we're going to push to get our right to vote. And so some teachers who couldn't go, they were too old or infirmed, still came out to support. And the teachers walked out on January 22nd, 1965. Now, what I'd like to share next is some testimony from these young foot soldiers. Here's Mr. Charles Malden, who was 17 at the time and the leader of the Dallas County Youth Group for Civil Rights. You'll also see Miss Linda Blackman Lowry, and she was 15 at the time and was protesting for civil rights. She'll testify. And then Mr. Allen, who was also a student protester, will talk about what they saw their teachers do. So these folks were young people, students at the time during the march. When they saw their teachers out, the whole community rose to this occasion. The teachers went down, they marched to the courthouse, they approached Sheriff Jim Clark. Their leader, Frederick Reese, said, "We are here to register to vote." He said his statements that we heard in the video and then pushed them off the stairs with the billy clubs. Teachers regrouped, went right back up the stairs again in face of this challenge, said, "We are here. This courthouse is not yours. This belongs to the people of Dallas County, and we are here to register to vote." Clark knocked them down a second time, pushed them back, and warned them if they came back a third time, they would be facing arrest. Now, Reverend Reese had prepared his people. It was a Friday, and they did this strategically so that if they got arrested, they'd have 2 days to try and get everybody out on bail and get them back to teaching by Monday. He told them to put a toothbrush, a washcloth, something to read in their pockets, so if they were arrested, they would be ready. So he said, "We're going back up those stairs again." And they headed up the stairs to the courthouse. And just as Clark was about to begin arresting, a hand reached out from the courthouse behind him and pulled him in. And Reverend Reese suspects that what happened in that conversation was, you can't arrest these teachers. Then we're going to have 70,000 children out in the streets with nobody looking after them. You cannot arrest these people. And so the teachers held their ground. They were not arrested. And they marched triumphantly. They didn't get to vote or register, but they did get to make their point. And they marched from there back to Brown's Chapel, which was the headquarters of the movement in Selma at this time, to an awaiting crowd who was elated to see that the teachers of their community had stood up for justice. And then this made a significant impact on the movement. Bernard Lafayette had worked really hard, but he was starting and sputtering and not getting very far. But once the teachers of this community marched, the whole community caught fire in terms of joining this movement. Andrew Young, Ambassador Andrew Young, who was a leader with Dr. King, he's in the front of the picture there. He said the Teachers' March was the most significant thing that happened in the racial movement since Birmingham. And suddenly throughout Selma, the phrase became, brother, we got a movement going on in Selma. Everybody started to march. Once the kids saw their teachers march, they were out in droves. The undertakers organized and they had a march for voting rights. The beauticians, all kinds of professionals throughout the city began to join the movement and join this marching. And the turning point, the key to that change was the Teachers' March. It set things up for everybody else. And from there, history got made. And so the Selma Voting Rights March, after the murder in Marion of Jimmy Walker, they decided to go on what became known as the Horrible Bloody Sunday, where the police beat and tear gassed protesters, but they weren't thwarted. They went back again on Turnaround Tuesday, and then finally they marched in large numbers all the way across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, all the way to Montgomery in the state capitol. And by the time they arrived in Montgomery, you had 25,000 people marching in. Miss Linda Lowry, Mr. Charles Malden were among them as young people on this march. And they marched to the state capitol, where Dr. King gave an incredible speech about the arc of the moral universe being long, but bending towards justice. And when he got to the end of the speech, he began to improv. And when he improv, it was always powerful. And he began to use a call response and say, how long? Not long. And the crowd would join him on that refrain. And it proved to be prophetic, because within a few months, President Johnson was signing a Voting Rights Act, thanks to the impact of this march and all the brave people who made it happen, and these teachers who helped turn the tide and become a turning point to get this passed. And so I want to celebrate those teachers tonight. We need to know their story, because right now in Florida, where this is happening, and throughout the United States, in many of these states that are blue on this map, we know that there are laws being passed putting teachers under attack. These teachers were under attack for being able to teach the truth. They're being under attack for telling the stories of different kinds of people. And so we know that we need to keep this movement for teachers going. It didn't end in Selma. People want to erase the history of the Selma teachers. They want to erase the history of Reverend Reese. They want to erase Black history. They want to erase the history of LGBTQ plus peoples. They want to erase trans children completely with these laws that they're passing. And so we need to see that the power of teachers is being attacked, and we need to support them and stand up. Americans have a right to freedom of speech, yet that is being denied teachers all across the country. And I can't overstate how important this is, that we stand up against this. If America is ever to be what we want it to be, we have to stop this kind of oppression of education. There's a great professor at Yale named Jason Stanley. He's written a book called How Fascism Works. And what he talks about there is how there are 10 ways that fascist politics works. And one of them is to stop, create a different construction of history and invent a glorious past, a great, again, America, that erasures inconvenient realities like slavery and injustice and disenfranchisement. And this is what's happening now, and we need to speak out against it. We need to do everything we can, because if we ever want to truly be United States, we must teach the truth. Dr. King spoke of a beloved community of people together with equality and justice together, and it's based on love. And since we're in a church this evening, I want to quote John, where it says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. America will never be a free country if we do not speak and teach the truth. So I asked this evening,
Jamey,
thanks,
Jamey.
2 in the morning, last thing, there it is, last thing I have to say, that we need teacher marches now. We need to be marching all over this country for teachers to stop these laws and what's happening.
We so agree with you. at the Institute for Common Power that when we launched, when we publicly announced the Institute for Common Power, we did it on January 22nd of 2022 to commemorate the Teachers March in Selma. So I just love you highlighting this, and you brought some facts to the table that I wasn't familiar with. So this is really, really powerful. Thank you, Jamey. I want to ask you one question about Hollyhock Humanities Fellowship. Okay. Is that something that can be relevant to the folks who might be watching here?
If we have folks in the New York City area, it certainly is. It's a fellowship program for social studies teachers in the New York City area. It's a year-long program where amazing professors like Professor Williams and Professor Scott come teach the teachers, and we also work on pedagogy and work with museums in order to improve our craft and be the best teacher we can for our kids. And all our teachers teach in under-resourced communities throughout the New York City area.
And Jamey, one last thing. What's a one or two or three or four or five sentence summary of what value the trip, the Truth and Purpose trip, had for you, given all of your knowledge and experiences? How did it, was it still valuable, and how?
Yes, it was incredibly valuable, David and Dr. Terry. I cannot express my gratitude enough for that trip. I think it was a combination of being in the places where these incredible things happened, being among people who were aligned, as was said earlier, spiritually and committed to justice. And finally, for me, the biggest treat was meeting the warriors and the foot soldiers of the movement, and just being in touch with what happened in the past to the present, because injustice still reigns in so many places, and seeing the people who fought for it, encouraging us to continue that fight. I just felt like I was tapping into, as I think I said to you once, a river of soul force, that the power of love and justice was felt there, and that I really felt in touch with that. And it really inspired me to remain active.
Yep, I sure do remember that conversation on the bus, and your terminology of a river of soul force, I think it just captured that about as well as anything I've ever heard. So, Jamey, it was a pleasure and an honor to be with you. I look forward to our next time we're together. Thank you for coming in the middle of the night to share your energy and your passion and your heart.
Thank you for having this. It's much needed, and I'm so glad for this cause. Thank you. Teach the truth.